Me, Jim Jones, myself. Gold records, platinum records, gold albums, platinum albums. No, me, Jim Jones. No diplomats, no nobody else. Me, Jim Jones. Pull up Nas' Billboard entries, then pull up my Billboard entries.
So I don't have much to say about it because I don't believe that Jim Jones believes that he's a better rapper than Nas.
Look, no disrespect to Jim, but Jim's not even close.
Jones has 9 entries in the Billboard 200 with 3 top 10 albums and no number ones, while Nas has 27 entries, 16 top 10 albums, and 6 that have reached number 1 on the Billboard.
There are levels to this rap game, and sometimes stepping outside your zone can get you torched. No shade, no beef, but when Jim Jones grabbed that mic and said he was better than Nas, that wasn't just ego talk. It was like lighting a stick of dynamite under years of quiet tension, misunderstood legacies, and public doubt. Let's keep it real. Hip-hop never fully embraced Jim like it did others from his era.
Jim says doesn't even make sense compared to what Nas has done for our culture.
Yeah. No hate to Jim, but facts are facts. He's not in the same lyrical league, not even close. It all went down in what seemed like a chill, laid-back interview. Jim was kicking it across from Angie Martinez, just vibing, talking his come up, his hustle, his legacy. Then out of nowhere, boom, he drops the bomb. I rap better than Nas. No smirk, no wink, just dead serious. Angie blinked like, wait, what? And when that clip hit the net, man, it blew up. Now listen, Jim's always carried himself with big energy. That's his whole thing. He talks big, moves big.
At a high level,
hey,
you check my record,
you jumping up and
I'm
down.
still playing at a high level. I'm rapping at a high level. You better check my stats, bro. I will run circles around Nas rap.
But saying you rap better than Nas, that's not just confidence, that's a wild statement. We're talking about Nas, the prodigy who dropped Illmatic at 19, the same Nas who studied, quoted, and idolized like he's rap royalty. So yeah, when Jim said that, he didn't just ruffle feathers, he touched a nerve that goes way deeper than just bars.
I never needed nowhere to stay. You act like on your couch. You was a fan. You begged us. You are a fan. A fan. We didn't grow up with you.
Yeah, social media went crazy. That clip of Jim's bold claims spread like wildfire. Memes, jokes, reaction videos all over the place. But this wasn't just internet noise. The culture started talking. NORE spoke on it during his show. Charlemagne called it a straight up reach.
Smell me?
Jimmy.
Word. And you already know what it is.
Fat Joe raised his eyebrows, and even Jadakiss threw in his 2 cents. Nobody came out swinging or throwing hate, but the vibe was loud and clear. Jim, come on now, don't go there. And it wasn't about tearing him down, it was hip-hop doing what it always does, protecting the legends and defending the art of the pen. In this game, respect ain't just about confidence or how loud you talk. It's about the bars, the classics, the real weight of your legacy. Jim's got moments, no doubt. We Fly High, early Dipset heat. They had the streets lit. But let's be honest, his lane has always been more about that raw energy and star power than deep lyrical cuts. That's not hate, it's just how people have seen it for years. Even Jim circled back later trying to clear things up. He said he wasn't coming for Nas, just felt like he's finally mastered his style and believes in his craft. Cool, but by then, that clip had already done damage. This wasn't just some off-the-cuff moment in an interview. Nah, it hit different. For some, it fed into an old belief that Jim's been talking way bigger than his music can back up. Not everyone felt that way, but it gave folks something to run with. Barbershops started buzzing, podcasts lit up, and people began pulling out receipts, comparing verses, albums, whole careers.
And these little running around, like I was brought up toting slammers. Like, so my belt had to be extra tight.
The real question wasn't whether Jim Jones had hits. He definitely had those. The question was, did the game ever truly see him as a rapper's rapper?
Jim Jones was never better than Nas. Jim Jones will never be better than Nas.
Or was he just Dipset's hype man, the one holding it down from the sidelines while others took the lyrical spotlight? Jim's out here saying, I'm still playing at a high level. I am rap, but not everyone's buying it. Some folks chalked that bold Nas claim up to pure ego. Others saw it as Jim finally demanding the credit he felt he's long been denied. Either way, the backlash was serious. And it's not like this was Jim's first time saying something wild. But this time, the crowd didn't brush it off. They pulled out receipts.
You smoke, right?
Yeah.
Were you smoking when you said you better than Nas?
I might have been a little bit. Well, as far as let's get this right. I'm way more influential than Nas, and I don't care what nobody.
What probably hit the hardest? It wasn't trolls or outsiders calling him out. It was people inside the circle, industry vets, fellow New Yorkers, even folks who came up in the same grind as him. They weren't throwing dirt on his name, but they weren't backing him either. And in hip hop, that silence, sometimes it hits harder than a diss track.
He want to do one with 50 Cent. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like Jim.
Nah, I don't want to do nothing with that sucker.
Still, all the online noise wasn't the real test. It was what came next. The moment people who knew Jim, who were right there when Dipset started popping, who saw Harlem in its prime, they started talking. That's when this situation flipped, because the core issue wasn't just about bars. It was about respect. And now we're headed into murky waters, because if hip-hop values anything almost as much as talent, it's loyalty. Especially in a place like Harlem, where your name is your currency.
Jimmy popping all that bullshit. I be seeing you, Jimmy, talking about, we Gucci boo boo. He in the Gucci store. Talking about, we Gucci boo boo. Them Black King niggas was going up. Jimmy, they was like, Marita man.
And when it comes to Jim's history with Cameron and Maze, oh, it's been messy, real messy. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, if you were a fan, a real one, you remember how untouchable Dipset looked. Cameron, Jim Jones, and Jules Santana weren't just a group, they were a movement. The swag, unmatched. The slang, straight up iconic. Their music videos, they defined the era. But even back then, people didn't really see Jim as the lyrical one. He was labeled the hype man from the jump. There was that infamous Hot 97 interview where Jim and Maze went at it live on air. Things got real when Mace hit him with the hard truth. Told Jim he wasn't really repping Harlem like that.
I believe there's more to this story because Jim Jones is way smarter than that. And
yeah,
absolutely.
you know, I don't know what's going on.
I've been in those situations where you in the car with somebody and somebody finds some drugs and nobody wants to claim anything until you get to the police station, and then the person who it was like, it's mine. But then it's too late by then.
It wasn't just radio theatrics. It exposed something way deeper: loyalty, identity, roots. And it didn't stop there. Cameron, the same one who gave Jim his start in the rap game, later distanced himself. The two had a public fallout, and Cam even threw shade, saying Jim had identity issues, like he was rewriting his spot in the Dipset story. A lot of fans started to feel it too, like Jim was always trying to prove he was more than just the third wheel behind Cam and Jules. Then there was that time Jadakiss checked him for real. Jim dropped a line mentioning Styles P, and Jada wasn't having it. It wasn't just a diss, it was a warning.
Jim Jones.
I see where Jim Jones is coming from. Like, I can see him, because if you're looking at the algorithms now, I can see where he's coming from. But you can't take the legendary status that what Illmatic has done. Just Illmatic. Illmatic is...
In New York, some names carry serious weight. And if you're gonna speak on them, your catalog better be solid. Today, Cam and Jim might smile for the cameras, but let's be honest, there's always been tension. And when the people closest to you won't fully back your name, the culture sees that, they feel it, and they remember it. This was never just about who had the best bars. It was about who the streets believed. And once Jim started burning bridges with the very people who put him on, the streets started turning their backs real quick, and then it got uglier. He ran into someone who didn't care about fame, hits, or flashy chains. Someone who had nothing to lose. Smell me, Jimmy? Word that moment? Yeah, it echoed through the city. By the time the drama between Jim, Cameron, and Mace went fully public, Jim's reputation in the rap world had already taken some serious body blows. But when that doubt spilled over from the booth to the block, that's when it got real. Dipset's internal mess had already made Jim look unstable. But what came next had people questioning something way deeper. Was Jim ever really built like that?
I admired Nas. But remember, Nas' first record, The Barbecue, came out when I was in 11th grade. Yes. So Nas was my idol when I was young. Like you did, came to dressing, the wordplay, the music, everything. I was a superior Nas fan.
This wasn't Cam talking slick on a podcast. This wasn't Maze throwing shots on Hot 97. Nah, this was the streets talking. And if you were outside in the late 2000s and early 2010s, you already know the name Ronald Raw Diggs Heron. He wasn't a rapper trying to play gangster. He was the real thing, a convicted kingpin, a known enforcer, and a man who once said he'd rather go out like Nino Brown than come back like Sammy the Bull. No clout chasing. He was the clout. So when Jim crossed paths with Raw Diggs, all that Dipset swag didn't mean a thing. Word on the street and confirmed in more than a few YouTube deep dives is that Jim rolled up to a Brooklyn Block event expecting his usual flowers. But Diggs, he wasn't starstruck. He didn't care about the jewels, the music videos, or the gang affiliation. Witnesses say Raw Diggs stepped right to Jim, no hesitation, questioned who he really was, and told him straight up, "You're not that guy out here." No fist flew, no gunplay, just raw energy. But in that moment of silence, that moment when Jim didn't respond, it hit way harder than any punch ever could. And here's what made it sting even more. This wasn't just some random dude off the block. Raw Diggs had a reputation. His name meant something. So when he checked Jim right there in front of everybody and Jim didn't say a word back, that silence spoke volumes. He didn't stand his ground, didn't clap back, just reportedly dipped out quiet. Online, fans brushed it off, called it hood myth, just another urban tale. But for those who knew the code, who understand street politics, this was a major red flag. Cause here's the truth, you can rap about that life, you can throw up signs on stage, but when the wolves show up, what really happens? Suddenly people weren't just questioning Jim's lyrics or his Dipset legacy, they were questioning his whole identity. This wasn't about music anymore. This was about respect, survival, and perception. Let's get one thing straight. This wasn't the first time Jim Jones claimed ties to real, heavy hitters. He's always name-dropped OGs, flashed his street alliances, and leaned hard on that Dipset Bloods affiliation. But here's the thing, none of that holds weight when the aura fades. Because if you say you're street, but the streets don't say it back, that's when the respect dries up. The Raw Diggs moment didn't make the headlines, but it didn't have to. In the places where clout means more than cash, that moment spoke volumes. And Jim, he never addressed it, never denied it, never stood on it. It just lingered like a silent stain on his name. And from that point on, people started looking at Jim real different. If the Dipset fallout bruised his image and the Raw Diggs check shook his street credibility, what happened next? That was public humiliation, and it came from none other than 50 Cent. And the wild part, it wasn't even personal for 50, it was sport. Let's run it back. At one point, 50 and Jim weren't beefing. In fact, they had mutual respect, or at least it looked that way. They were both talking big hustle, big street energy, both pushing that independent boss lifestyle. But all that flipped when Jim started airing out Mace, then Cameron, and then, big mistake, he started talking numbers. And in 50 Cent's world, if you talk numbers, you better come with proof, cold, hard receipts. And Jim, he didn't have them. Suddenly 50 flipped the switch. He clowned Jim publicly, called him a substitute, and made it clear he wasn't impressed. That moment was brutal, not because it was violent or messy, but because it was effortless. 50 didn't come at Jim like an enemy. He came at him like a bored bully. And when 50 targets you just for fun, that's when you know your stock has dropped. Jim had already taken hits in the streets. Now he was taking L's in the spotlight. And the worst part, he couldn't spin it. Not with alliances, not with bravado, not with numbers. Because by then, nobody was buying it. When Jim Jones dropped his El Capo album, he thought it was his moment, his big win. He expected respect, applause, maybe even a little redemption. But instead, he got clowned. And leading the charge, none other than 50 Cent. 50 hit Instagram like a kid in a candy store, just torching Jim for days. He posted Jim's album sales, barely crossing 5 figures, with a savage caption that had fans in tears. But 50 wasn't done, not even close. He went straight for the jugular and brought up that wiretap scandal. Yeah, that one. The federal docs that linked Jim to a phone call with Tekashi 6991 and Mel Murda. The streets were buzzing, the blogs were lit, and the internet exploded. No charges, no arrests. But that didn't matter. In the court of public opinion, perception beats paperwork. And 50 knew exactly how to stir the pot. He didn't say it flat out, but the message was clear. Jim looked like he was playing both sides. 50 even dropped a post calling him a dry snitch, followed by a wall of laughing emojis. To someone like 50, trolling is sport, it's strategic. But for Jim, it was a total PR disaster. Jim tried to play it cool. He fired back with laughs of his own.
I looked it up to see like who gets searched more in 2025. It's still not.
Called 50 a clown, tried to brush it off like it was nothing. But the internet, it never forgets. And when 50 aims that massive spotlight at you, when he mocks you in front of millions, you feel it deep. And the wildest part, 50 didn't even drop a diss track. He didn't need one. A few memes, a couple captions, and suddenly Jim wasn't trending for his music. He was trending as the punchline. Now all those old beefs, the street whispers, the loyalty questions, they all started circling back. That capo title he gave himself, it started to sound like a joke because while Jim was still out here calling himself the general, more and more people weren't listening. They weren't saluting. They were scrolling, laughing, and moving on. The worst part, Jim had no real way to clap back. This wasn't just some rap beef, it was about respect.
Streaming-wise, Nas has about 9.1 million monthly Spotify listeners, while Jim Jones clocks in around 875,000.
And once 50 Cent turned him into a walking joke on a national stage, the whispers turned into laughter. For Jim Jones, that silence that followed, that might have been the loudest moment of all. But by then, it was too late. At this point, Jim wasn't just trying to earn respect, he was chasing it. After years of playing second fiddle in Dipset, taking losses in interviews, and getting turned into meme content by 50, he needed a comeback, a moment, a spark. Instead, what he did next was like pouring gasoline on a fire that was already burning. In a sit-down with Angie Martinez, Jim dropped a line that stopped the internet in its tracks. "I'm better than Nas. Ain't nobody bumping Nas in the streets like that." Boom, the internet froze, then exploded. Twitter lit up, forums, podcasts, comment sections, they all went wild. Fans were confused, some offended, others laughing, and some all three at once, because you don't just casually say you're better than Nas, the man who gave us Illmatic. It was written Stillmatic, KD 1, 2, 3, and who secured a Grammy decades into his run. Even legends had to jump in. Fat Joe raised an eyebrow.
Google-based searches. Nas gets between 200 and 300,000 searches a month globally. Jim Jones gets 40 to 70,000 searches.
Jadakiss had to respond, and Nor, one of Jim's own longtime homies in the industry, couldn't let it slide either. On Drink Champs, Nor tried to keep it respectful but had to shut it down. "We love Jim, but that ain't a conversation, bro, not Jim Jones." And that right there, that was the moment when even your closest allies start drawing the line. That's when the culture starts drawing conclusions. This wasn't even about whether Jim Jones had hits. That was never the point. The real question was, what are we even talking about right now? Illmatic isn't just an album, it's a blueprint for the culture. Nas is a pillar, and Jim, even the most loyal Dipset fans, had to look away in silence. When your own people start saying, yeah, nah, that's a tough one, you know it's bad. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Nas had just wrapped up his King's Disease trilogy, 3 albums that showcased sharp lyricism, growth, and timeless artistry. He wasn't stuck in the past. He was evolving, still relevant, and winning Grammys. Meanwhile, Jim was out here still pushing street flex bars with a 2007 mixtape rollout plan. The contrast, brutal. But here's the kicker. Jim doubled down after the backlash. No backpedal, no softening the blow. He explained himself instead. Said it wasn't about lyricism, it was about relevance, about what the streets were playing, about his world. And that right there was the problem, because Jim's world, it didn't look like hip-hop's world anymore. The streets he was talking about weren't the streets the culture was paying attention to. The response from fans and peers, one giant eye roll, because today's hip-hop isn't just the block, it's global. And globally, Nas is a titan. Jim's words didn't come off bold, they sounded like a man desperate to stay in the conversation. And let's not forget, this wasn't just about opinion, this was about legacy. Nas didn't need to bark for attention. His work speaks for itself. He's outlived trends, eras, and labels. He's aged into greatness. Meanwhile, Jim's still out here 20 years in, fighting for a chair at the grown-ups table. For a lot of fans, this was the moment it clicked. Jim didn't fully get the kind of respect he was asking for. Because in hip-hop, you don't beg for your flowers. You drop classics so undeniable, the culture hands you the bouquet without being asked. And here's the cold part, when even your own people start stepping back from your claims. That's not just a loss in public perception, that's a private L. Because in hip-hop, respect isn't just about how loud you talk, it's about who's still standing behind you when you talk that talk. For Jim Jones, that support system, the people who once had his back started thinning out. It didn't happen all at once, but the shift was real. You could trace the tension all the way back to the early 2000s, but things didn't fully start unraveling until Mase stepped back into the picture. Now remember, Mase was around before Dipset even had a name. He knew Cameron and Jim from way back in their Harlem days, when everything was still about the block, not the blogs. So when Mase popped up on different platforms and made it very clear he wasn't feeling the way Jim was speaking on Cam, that hit different. He wasn't playing politics, he was calling it how he saw it, from an insider's lens that ran deep. Jim tried to respond, tried to defend himself, but the vibe was off. This wasn't just two grown men disagreeing, it felt more like old family wounds bleeding out in public. Then came that Hot 97 tape, the one from 2004, that resurfaced like a scar that never really healed. Jim, Mase, and Cam all going at it, live on air. No filter, no label-approved script, just raw Harlem tension on blast. Listening to it years later, you could hear it clear. The fractures were already there. They just kept smiling through it for the cameras. As Jim pushed harder into solo fame, more interviews, more street talk, more attempts to control his narrative, it was hard not to notice that Cameron wasn't matching that energy. He wasn't posting, wasn't appearing, wasn't standing beside Jim. He was silent on purpose. And fans, they caught that right away. Every now and then Cam would speak on it, but even then it came off cold. Dry comments, sarcastic one-liners, sometimes nothing more than a shrug. The message couldn't be clearer. Whatever Jim's on, that's all him. And in hip-hop, where your crew's support is everything, that type of silence says it all. And it wasn't just Cameron backing away, Styles P stepped in too. A heavyweight in New York rap and someone the streets actually listened to. When Jim threw his name into one of those online back and forths, Styles didn't let it slide. He shut it down quick, made it crystal clear he didn't like being mentioned, and reminded everybody what real street credibility looks like. It ain't about loud talk, it ain't about flexing on the gram, it's about consistency, respect, and keeping your name clean. That's what the streets honor. At that point, the energy around Jim shifted. He wasn't just out here trying to gain respect, he started to look isolated. And it wasn't just from beef, it was about timing. Cam had moved on. He reinvented himself with slick business moves, podcasts, and smart media plays. Mase stepped into his preacher-turned-podcaster lane and carved his own comeback. Even Joel Santana, who's been mostly quiet, never inserted himself into these messy debates. But Jim, he was still out here spinning the same block, still sitting down for interviews, still breaking down Dipset history, trying to explain who did what and when. And the more he talked, the more folks started tuning him out. In a culture that's always thrived on crew love, Wu-Tang, G-Unit, Outkast, even Dipset, it matters when your team starts fading out of your picture. And Jim, he always fought harder than the rest for that spotlight, always wanted that respect. But at some point, it stopped feeling like hustle and started looking like a solo campaign. After all the interviews, all the albums, all the viral clips, one thing still wouldn't go away: the respect problem. Not because Jim didn't grind, not because he didn't stay active, but because somewhere along the line, the image he tried to sell and the reality the culture actually saw, they just never really lined up. And nowhere was that gap between image and reality more exposed than in that quiet, almost forgotten moment with Rod Diggs. This wasn't some headline-making beef. It didn't trend on Twitter. It wasn't chopped up for clout on podcasts or dissected on the radio, but the people in the room, the ones who really know how the streets work, They never forgot it. Rod Diggs pulled up on Jim, not wild, not screaming, just calm, direct, face to face. No circus, no viral moment. And Jim, the same dude known for his loud interviews, disses. And chest pounding? He didn't stand tall, he didn't match that same energy. He went quiet, folded, and that silence, it spoke volumes. It stuck with people, not because it was violent, but because it was real. It showed just how wide the gap was between the version of Jim that lived on camera and the version that stood in that room. It was one of those street moments that doesn't need a headline. The story just travels quietly. And those are the stories that stick harder than anything said on a mic. Jim's issue wasn't just one bad quote or one wrong move, it was the pattern, the cycle. He'd make bold claims like saying he was better than Nas and then get checked by the very culture he was trying to impress. By the fans, by the legends, even by his own circle. He clashed with Maze, fell out with Cam, and instead of handling it behind the scenes, it always spilled out in the open, messy, loud, and with receipts. Then came that moment with Rod Diggs. The ultimate reminder, street energy ain't something you can fake. You either got it or you don't. And in that room, Jim didn't look like the guy he spent years portraying. So when you stack it all up, the interviews, the contradictions, the solo crusade for validation, it becomes clearer why the respect he chased never fully landed. Not because he didn't grind, not because he didn't want it bad enough. If anything, Jim hustled harder than most. He never stopped showing up, never stopped talking. But somewhere along the way, talking wasn't enough, and the culture was no longer convinced. Jim never stopped talking, never stopped trying to control the narrative, but here's the thing, respect doesn't come from volume, it comes from foundation. And when people finally stepped back and looked closer, what they saw was a man still trying to convince the culture that he belonged in a conversation that had already moved on without him. Whether it was lyrical rankings, real street credibility, or his spot in the industry, Jim Jones just never fully stuck. The culture didn't shut him out of hate. It just never felt like he earned that seat the way legends do. And that's what really told the story. Not the mixtapes, not the interviews, not the drama, but the disconnect. Because in hip hop, presence is everything. And when the moment came, when the spotlight was on and the room was watching, Jim didn't hold it. He didn't own it. He faded. But hey, that's the story. Sometimes it's not about how long you last, it's about what kind of mark you leave when you're there. If you rocked with this breakdown, make sure to like, drop a comment, subscribe, and share this with someone who remembers the Dipset days. We've got more heat coming your way, so stay locked in. See you on the next one.